love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. My very special guest today is Wallace Slattery. Is it Slattery or Slattery? Wallace?
Slattery.
Say that again.
Slattery will get you
Slattery.
nowhere.
Slattery gets you nowhere. I love it. Hey, it's great to have you here. I've enjoyed your comments on the program. under various posts and some of our live shows. And I didn't realize you were 82, though. Look, you look a lot younger than that. When you said that in one of the comments, I thought, no way.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
So that means you were born during the war.
Yes, I was. I have memories of the war.
Wow, incredible. Well, I'm really looking forward to today's interview because it seems like you were kind of there at ground zero for several kind of events, Walter Ray, Des Ford, Glacier View, this kind of thing. So we're looking forward to unpacking some of your journey. Let's just bring in a few comments. We've got, hey, Peter from David 1221. Good to have you here, David. And Fred Simmons, health to everyone. Peace, Peter. Awesome. Stephen Beagles, I think, is writing this one. Remember, if you're writing from Facebook, please add your name in there. And Antonio, Texas. By the way, Stephen, did you go to was it 2016 or 15 GC that was held in San Antonio? And we've got Gillian Ford watching. Hey, Gillian, good to have you here. Little Mountain, Queensland. And who else? Oh, yep. Thank you, Stephen. He's added his name now. Great to have George Tishi here. Hey, George. I'm glad you made it too, as well. And we've got Laurie White from Oklahoma. It's interesting, Wallace, that we've got a big Australian audience and New Zealand and South Pacific, but our largest audience, even though I'm here in Australia, is in the States. So it's and David, South Carolina. Oh, this is a good one here. Avis Johnson. It would be awesome for you to make it to Loma Linda for the former Adventist conference. Hey, it looks like it's going to happen. It looks like it is going to happen. So watch this space, everyone. And if you're near Loma Linda, I think it's February 16, 17, 18, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I just read an email from James today, and it looks like, cross fingers, that it is going to happen. So I'm looking forward to that. So if anyone wants to help with airfares, accommodation, travel, that kind of thing, sorry, Wallace, to do all these plugs before we bring you on officially. But if people would like to support this trip, where I hop in the big jet airliner and fly over to Los Angeles, you can scan the QR code that's on the screen there. Boy, it's sweltering here. What's the temperature there, Wallace?
20 degrees Fahrenheit.
What would that be Celsius?
About minus 12 or so.
Wow, that's just incredible temperatures. Where
it's ice on the ground.
Where do you live again?
Delaware.
Right. Well, it is so hot here. I'll be using my
We're on the East Coast.
Right, on the East Coast. So what time is it?
It's about, 8:45 here.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you everyone again for watching, and we're going to get started. So, Wallace, tell us who you are, and then I want to go right back to the beginning, where you were born. Were you raised a Seventh-day Adventist? Were you born into the church? Did you become a member later on in life? Let's cover all those bases.
I certainly was born into that Adventism. My parents were devout Seventh-day Adventists. I married a girl whose parents, my father-in-law was a high church official. My mother-in-law was a church employee. And by the way, I just got to say, I love your music at the beginning.
Oh, thank you.
But,
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Marvelous. But anyway,
thank you.
I became a teacher in Seventh-day Adventism. There were no questions about it. You didn't even think about questioning it. Adventism was invincible biblically, and Ellen White was this almost perfect being who received regular 3 a.m. visits from angels and wrote down what the angels told her to say and then passed it on. So that gives you an idea of where we were coming from.
Mm.
And 1975, I was transferred. I got a call to be elementary principal in Garden Grove Adventist School, California. And this was where I first began to get maybe a little bit of an awakening. I'd like to say that Adventism for many years had a free ride. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but after, even John Harvey Kellogg, I really have a hard time thinking of anybody who stood up, any important person who stood up and said, there are problems with Adventism. It just didn't happen.
Mm.
Walter Martin, of course, had been talked by the Adventists into stating that Adventism is not a cult. And so they had many years where they were able to grow without any particular contradiction in their teachings and their that they were this valid church. However, in December of 1975, I was visiting the Spanish church there in Santa Ana, California, and one of the men had a leaflet on a new book that had just come out by Ron Numbers called Messenger of Health. And
Is that
I was
the Prophetess of Health?
Pardon me?
Was that the Prophetess of Health?
Yeah, Prophetess of Health.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. It's been a while.
It's a great book. I've got it behind me here, and I've read it a few times, and possibly that was the first book that influenced me on my journey out, actually.
Well, same here.
Yeah, interesting.
And
So how did you hear about it? Because like you're saying, there was no questioning, you weren't allowed to ask these questions. How did the advertising of that book come across your table?
they had me give the sermon at the Spanish church, and one of the men had this leaflet advertising this
Sorry,
book.
you said that. Yeah.
And, so, that really got my interest up. I did go to the library and managed to get a copy and read it. And then, of course, Adventism, the White Estate came out with its denial of the book. And I was able to say, well, maybe there isn't anything to it. Maybe it's just a malcontent. And so I didn't pay too much attention. Then a year or two later, my college roommate, Larry Boschel, visited us in California with his family. Larry he had been a Seventh-day Adventist minister. And suddenly, about 1974, I believe it was, Larry left the ministry and Adventism at great personal sacrifice in his finances, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
But Larry and his family came out, and Larry and they took me out to eat, and Larry started asking me questions, such questions as, why were Ellen White's prophecies not coming true? Why was the White Estate so secretive? Questions like this. And it started again, it raised questions, but nothing happened.
Mm.
Then a couple of years later, 1978, I met an Adventist woman, a fellow teacher from Loma Linda, who mentioned that there was a real problem with, Walter Ray had come out stating that a lot of Ellen White's work had been copied. And I said, you're kidding. And she had some material on that. She brought it to me. And also, she also brought the Spectrum magazine, the Adventist magazine, with the 1919 Bible Conference minutes in it. And I read through those and was just stunned. All of a sudden, I realized there was a problem here.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that there was huge amounts of copying, that these men did not regard Ellen White the same way that we had been taught we should. And I say it was something that was worthy of my research. Well, I was working on an advanced degree at La Sierra University, And actually, at that time, it was at Loma Linda University, La Sierra branch. And so during my spare time at the library there, I started doing my own research. And this went on for quite a while, for several years, actually. In the summers, I was over there working on the degree. And I began to realize that all roads seemed to lead to Walter Ray. So I called him. And incidentally, he was about 30 miles west of where I was teaching
Wow.
at the time. And I made an appointment to visit with him. Now, this was in August 1980.
Wow.
4 years had gone by. I went over there, and what he showed me just absolutely blew me out of the water. I couldn't believe it. Copying, he had it around, and I honestly think that he was right. About 70% was copied. False prophecies, for example, the shut door, that probation had closed back there in 1844, 45. And it just blew my out of the water. I took it. I bought some materials from him. I took them home, read them thoroughly Friday afternoon. Saturday, I showed them to my wife, Carol, and she was just shocked as I was. And thank God, she actually said, "Hey, it's correct. We can't deny it." But then she said, "I'm going to check to see if there's any actual validity to this material." She called two people. One was Norman Jarnes, who at that time was editor of Verdict magazine, the Robert Brinsmead publication.
Right, yeah.
Yes. And the other was John Taves, who had been a minister, or assistant minister where we attended church. John was a really brilliant and dynamic person. And Carol called him. He was one person we respected. So many Adventist ministers, well, maybe I shouldn't say it. I was less than enthusiastic about them. But I called, and John said, this really shocked us. He said, not only is it correct, he said, my entire church this coming Saturday is leaving Adventism, and they're voting their way out.
Wow.
Church of about Imperial Beach, California, a church of about 500 members.
Whoa.
So we went down there, and as you can imagine, we were really disillusioned. How can we believe anything when all this time, everything that it seemed like that we had been taught was a lie? Ellen White had made mistakes. She was copying right and left. We just didn't know what to believe. But we talked at length with John at that church meeting where they pulled out. And then John said, I'm going to get you in touch with some people, the Jim Larsons. They're ex-Adventists, and they'll be happy to share with you a lot of material. And certainly, the Larsons called us some time back, later, I'm sorry. And I don't have Alzheimer's, just a little part-timer sometimes. And anyway, the Larsons then came over to visit us. They actually lived only about 10 miles north of us. They're in California. And they said, we have a new book for you, Judged by the Gospel by Robert Brinsmead. Now, Brinsmead's quite an interesting character. I'm sure you've probably discussed him in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But, he was a real, what's the word I'm looking for? He has taken an odyssey in his life. That's for sure. Starting off as a right-wing perfectionist Adventist. He had become an evangelical Adventist at that time, and then became an evangelical Christian. And then, well, I'll go on because I'll tell you more about that in a second. You'll enjoy it. But we read through the book thoroughly. I still have the book. I love it. It's interesting. He predicted that Adventism would become evangelical. He was very good at pointing out many of these flaws with Ellen White and her writings and so forth.
Mm.
And meanwhile, I had been talking to a sister and brother-in-law, who then talked to my other sister and brother-in-law, who then called my conference superintendent, trying to make sure that I got fired. And well, he called me in, and fortunately, he had a level head on him. And I said, "Well, I'm looking for the truth. I've been finding a lot of things." And he said, "Well, why don't you keep on writing or studying, and then write me what you come across with?" Well, interestingly enough, Judged by the Gospel actually put us back into Adventism. We were no longer these right-wing Adventists. We were Adventists who would believe that, our attitude toward Ellen White changed. We now regarded her as inspired, but not a subject of revelation.
Mm.
That God had come to her, and she had made mistakes, like a minister who prays before going before his parishioners. He may make mistakes, but he's still inspired because God is speaking through him in a general sense. And that's where we were willing to accept Ellen White. So I wrote that to our conference supervisor, and then we went on. Well, I had meanwhile switched into another school, and the minister there was an extreme right-wing perfectionist. And he, when they were going to turn this church school into a part-time work study situation, where the kids would spend half their days digging in the ground, planting crops and so forth. And I opposed that. I mean, I was willing to have them do some work study, but certainly nothing like that. And so my tenure there at that church or school was coming to an end.
Mm.
So we were then called to Pennsylvania. We didn't want to go back there because my children were in violin, and my wife was able to get them into not Juilliard, the other one, a famous school in Philadelphia, anyway. And so the school I was going to teach in was near Philadelphia. And I think that's where we began to realize how much our thinking had changed us. Because if we mentioned anything at all, that those church members would just have a fit. And the word wasn't long before, well, this church school teacher doesn't believe in Ellen White.
Mm.
And so just to go on briefly, we did go on. I did teach there for 2 years. My teaching came to an end. And then we had plenty of time because I did not have work there for a few months, where we studied our way through what Robert Brinsmead was bringing out in Verdict. And the things that he was bringing out were absolutely earth-shattering.
Mm.
About the Sabbath, the sanctuary, all the meat, the unclean meats and all that sort of thing, all the things that Adventism had been teaching, we realized were just false. They were not biblical. And so finally, in March of 1984, we resigned from Seventh-day Adventism. Well, I've been talking pretty fast. Let's give you a chance to get a word in edgewise.
Well, so I'm fascinated. I love hearing this kind of story because you came to a crossroads a little later, I understand, and we'll come to that. I want you to build to that, but we're not revealing anything shocking. But you left the church, and it's interesting that for a while, though, after you'd read Brinsmead's book, you did see the evangelical Adventist side of things, and you saw Ellen as just an inspired person. I wonder what it is that makes someone like yourself leave at that point when you did, whereas a lot of people who have stayed that are your age and maybe 10 years younger, a little bit older, they hung on to this idea that Ellen White is inspired but not as elevated as she'd once been. They seem to be able to kind of keep that intention, whereas a lot of people just left. Like you said, that whole church just left, 500 people. I guess started a new congregation. But what do you think's going on with people that go that are your generation, that face those same shocking revelations? And for your generation, it was worse. Even my generation had Ellen White so elevated that when I read The White Lie and Prophetess of Health, it shocked me, but I still stayed. So I'm not saying that. I guess I was a bit younger when I read those things, but why do you think that is? That some can find a way to justify it, and others just go, "No, I'm done."
I have gone through that question 1,000 times, and I don't know. There seems to have to be a spark in a person that helps them respond to the information, because you can have 2 people, maybe 10 people, and 9 of them will receive the information and not change at all in their belief in Adventism, and the other person will say, "That's it, I'm done." And I don't understand that. I have gone through this many times. I have friends, incidentally, they're in Australia. Let me give a shout out to Dominic and his wife, and his mother and father became Seventh-day Adventists, and he has presented all kinds of information to them. It seems not to affect them at all. And I wish maybe somebody has a better answer than I do. I really don't.
So let's see. I was probably still a teenager when a lot of this stuff was coming out, and I didn't fully face it until the early 1990s, and I didn't leave though until I was 55. So in some ways, I should be able to answer that. And I guess I'm not too sure either, because Adventism seems to have a real hold on people in certain ways that are unique to other denominations. What do you think they are? If we plumb this kind of question a little bit more, putting you on the spot a bit, but I guess can be people's pay packets, people's standing. I remember soon after Glacier View, and Avondale College, then now university, was just down the road from me. So many young pastors left the church because of Glacier View. So as I came into the early 1980s in the youth Sabbath school down the road here, I noticed that all the cool hip youth pastors are gone, and the people that were taking their place were decades older than us. So there was a massive bunch of people that did leave, and a lot who stayed but remained pretty quiet about it.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm not even sure what I'm talking about, but I'm just kind of trying to just look at the
Let me mention something.
Psychology behind it.
I'll mention something that might tie in with this. There was a study done in the early 80s of Adventist ministers, and a very high proportion, I think it's like 75%, said they would leave the Adventist ministry if they could. But Adventism pays them much better than what most churches pay their ministers. And so these people, if they leave, may find themselves in financial straits. And it takes a pretty courageous person to say, "I don't believe in this, I'm leaving," like Jill did.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Laurie White has asked me, what kept you in the SDA even when presented with evidence of it in the lies? Was it fear? It definitely wasn't fear. Not at all. I became aware of the details of all of this stuff that Wallace is talking about in the 90s, where he would have been aware of it in the late 70s, early 80s. I think for me, and I love questions that come through that kind of put me on the spot, because it makes me think real fast, and I think you don't have a filter when you're doing that. I think for me, those that stayed, and they were a little bit older, they were offering this false hope. I know it's false hope now, but they kept saying, Pete, the church is about to change. It's about to become more evangelical. And so I stayed, I think, on this promise, this false hope. And then I got into the role of being a musician and leading out in worship and that kind of thing. And I found myself saying the same thing to the young people. Hey, things are changing, let's hang in there, because that's what I was being told. And then eventually, when we had the Antonio vote, the no vote, I thought, hang on a second, regardless of if people believe women's ordination or not, I suddenly went, hang on, I can see this church is never going to change, and it is based on, they do not want the authority of Ellen White questioned. At that moment, I thought, I've got to leave. And I began the process of, and it still took another couple of years after that, but yeah, so that might help answer your question there, Laurie.
We observed the same thing, and that is that where we expected that the church would become evangelical and would accept the facts that had come out, we saw instead they closed ranks and froze out those people that had more progressive ideas.
Exactly. And I just one last thing there, Laurie. My family were very progressive. My father was a lecturer here. My mother was a teacher. I was raised on we called it the Hill at Avondale, where there was lots of progressive lecturers and their kids. And my Adventism in early years wasn't the same as what I realized a lot of other people's experiences there, though it was still scary when I was young. But yeah, the actual machine, the system, like you say, Wallace, if they see people that are asking questions, they just squeeze them out.
Well, that's what happened to us. Now, I mentioned we were in a church in Pennsylvania, and we were simply frozen out. I don't know how else to describe it. Their attitude toward us changed very rapidly. From then on, it was just a matter of time. And that isn't why we left, though. I do want to emphasize we left because we simply could not accept the doctrines.
And I like that. There's like when I interview people like yourself that couldn't accept the doctrines, and by 1984 had kind of left. I've got Harry Ballas's book here somewhere, and I think that might have been what you were referring to. He's an Australian academic scholar, and he interviewed many of the Adventists that left. There's a certain kind of I don't want to go there with saying that, but there's something different about you guys that left by 84 that is different to those that stayed and kind of offered us this false hope. I'm not criticizing them. I think they genuinely felt it was going to change. They genuinely felt. So I think the key, and George Tichy just said it there. I'll bring that up. Where is it, George? This important point. Remember, the SA Church will never change. So I think the people like yourself that left, maybe a key ingredient is that you went, this is never going to change. Where those of your generation that stayed, and I'm not criticizing them, good on them. They were like, oh, we think it can change. And I think some of them still do think that. And maybe that's why they still stay.
I have a classmate who sent me a copy of her new book. It was just full of lovely lady, but she sent me her new book, and it was just full of an Adventist slant on things. And I wrote her back, and I thanked her for the book, of course, and complimented her on many good things in the book. But I said, your view of Adventism and mine are very different. Mine is of suppression, paranoia, and one other thing I forgot. But
Oppression, paranoia.
yeah, suppression and paranoia, and fear. And she wrote back and said, well, main thing is that we accept Jesus Christ our Savior. And I said, absolutely. But of course, Adventism adds a lot of baggage to that.
That's true.
That is a woman who is still, I think, maybe still hoping that maybe Adventism will change.
And I've found that Adventist apologists are very, very clever. They're very good at making you feel, oh, good, nothing to see here.
Yeah. I wanted to tell you a little more about Robert Brinsmead.
Yeah.
If you remember, I'd taken you to the point where he had become an evangelical Christian.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, he showed up in Pennsylvania to give a lecture. And I couldn't go for some reason. I think I was working. But Carol, my wife, went. And she came back and she said, guess what? They've become pantheists. God is in everything. I said, well, we had just become evangelical Christians because of him. And then suddenly we were supposed to become pantheists. I said, I'm not going there.
Yes. Yeah, you didn't want to, you were influenced by him, but you were able to use your own mind and go, I'll not go that far.
No, I never did. And I understand from what I've read that I understand the gentleman's still alive, and I'm very grateful for all the material he brought out that brought us through Adventism into evangelical Christianity. But I understand he's actually become an agnostic. So I don't know if that's true, but I've read that.
I've interviewed him twice on the show, and both times are over 3.5 hours. So go and look up the interviews. And the first interview, we talk a lot about his more, he doesn't call it legalistic. I challenged him on that, and he said, no, you've got the nuance wrong there. He's a very interesting character. I really enjoyed interviewing him.
Yeah.
But we went from that era through to his evangelical era. And then I had him on again, and we talked about how he kind of went into more, like what you're talking about and beyond. And then he had a real secular phase, and he even became a councillor in one of the local government bodies that up where he lives. And he started a business called, I think, Tropical Fruit Land. What's it called? Adrian, if you're watching, let me know. I've just forgotten. So he became quite a successful businessman and well respected in the secular realm where he lived. And then towards the end of that interview, he said, then I kind of, some people have said I kind of moved into sort of agnosticism and stuff. And but I'm really interested in Jesus the man, and the story of Jesus, not the spiritual part of it, the Jesus the man. So I then said, well, let's have you back and we'll talk more about that. So we're kind of due another interview, but he's still going strong, and he'd be 92, 93, I reckon, maybe more.
He's got a couple up on me yet.
The thing I respect about him is some people said during the interview, he just flip-flopped in his life. No, I don't agree with that. He had a trajectory demonstrating that he was using his mind, an inquiring mind, to explore, to ask why, to find his path. And I don't care if someone's path leads them to atheism. I just respect people that think. And you might lament a certain path that someone's taken, but I certainly don't. I see him as an honorable man.
I do too.
Yeah.
I call it an odyssey. He started here and he just went wherever his own interests led him. So
yes, that's right.
You asked me about Desmond Ford. Maybe the audience would like hearing my short visit with Desmond Ford.
Yes, tell us about it.
This was in 1980, about 1980, at the Adventist camp in southeastern California, the Southeastern Conference, California Conference camp. I forget the name of it. I haven't been there for many, many years. But Desmond Ford spoke there, and I was privileged to join maybe about 2 other people and have breakfast with him. And I wasn't so interested at that time. Perhaps I hadn't gotten that far in my thinking yet about the sanctuary, although that, of course, was a very hot topic at that time. But righteousness by faith was something that was quite new to me. And of course, Des Ford was a very good man at that too.
Mm.
And so the entire time talking about that, I thought he was a wonderful man. I cannot recommend the man highly enough.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. What year was that you had breakfast with him?
not sure, 79, 80, somewhere right in there.
Right, just before the whole Glacier View kind of thing happened and exploded.
Now, the other person that I just mentioned briefly is I also met Dr. Donald Davenport with the Davenport Affair.
That's amazing. Tell us about that.
Well, he was on the school board of that first school I was teaching with in Garden Grove, California. He was a distinguished looking gray haired gentleman, very quiet. He would just simply sit there and listen. But of course, I don't know if your audience knows about that, but what he was doing was going to high church officials, including the president of the General Conference at that time, whose name I forget.
I think it was Neil Wilson.
Before him.
Oh, before Pearson. So if it was in the 70s, it would have been Pearson or Neil Wilson.
Pearson. And what he was doing was he was building post offices, and he borrowed money from these people in order to, finance his work. And then he would pay them back, supposedly interest rates as high as 80%. So, I mean, these guys were making money hand over fist. What they were doing then, and this is where it gets tragic, was they were going to these little old lady retirees and saying, this is a wonderful thing. Look at this. Look at the money we're making. You need to get involved in this. And of course, what happened was that these little old ladies then invested their money, their life savings in this, and then the whole thing collapsed. Davenport was never prosecuted for it. There was a lot of suspicion that it was a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, I did know the man at least.
That's interesting. I've talked to some people about that in previous interviews, but I don't think to people who had met. Oh, actually, yes, I did. Jim Wagner, who was Walter Ray's kind of attorney and friend during that time, he went to the same church as Davenport, and Davenport's wife was friends with him, and that's how he got a lot of inside information.
Oh, okay.
About it. Have you read Pirates of Privilege that Walter Ray wrote after The White Lie?
No, somehow I've missed that one. Go ahead.
That one is available online, but it's the whole reveal of the Davenport fiasco, and it names names, and it's very online. But the church threatened to take away his sustentation. Apparently, I think Kevin Morgan is watching today, and he knows a bit about that as well. And so Walter Ray, with the threat of losing his sustentation, agreed not to print the book. But it's freely available out there online. Now, check it out. You'd be really interested in it. Yeah. And he reveals names.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Pirates of Privilege, Walter Ray. And what shocked me about that whole story is, like you say, the actual leaders were sucked into it, and they managed to talk Adventist people. And my understanding, I might be wrong because I haven't researched it for a while, it's in the book Who Watches, Who Cares by Doug Hackelman. Oh boy, my brain is fried today. Anyway, it's in that book. I've got it behind me somewhere. I'm
Wait till you're.
pretty sure that they spent $20 million US dollars 1979 money
Hmm.
into the Ponzi scheme. So
Oh,
that's imagine how much that would be equivalent to today.
yeah, you can double it, maybe
Yeah.
triple it.
Did he come across as someone that was devious, misleading kind of guy? Did he seem like a normal,
No, he's
gentleman?
quiet, a very quiet person. I think he obviously was very persuasive because he had all these very high general conference officials involved in his schemes.
What
So,
did you think about these guys who are preaching the imminent return of Jesus, making long-term investment plans?
yeah. Well, that's been going on, I think, since the beginnings of Adventism, so I'm not too surprised.
Yeah, that's very true. I'll just read a couple of comments that people have been posting there. Darylyn White, hey Darylyn, has written, for many people, it is a social habit to go to church on Sabbath. While living in Vietnam, we were not allowed to attend church, and so over 2 years, the social factors were gone. And when we returned to Australia, we were drawn to a church that met our spiritual needs without the social ties of Adventism. Yeah, that's interesting. Sometimes people need to have a little break in the loop, and that can just set them off. Yeah,
I'd like to say something about Ellen White.
yeah,
I think you can see where, when I wrote my book, our Seventh Day Adventist False Prophets,
that's
that
right. I wanted to talk about that book.
yeah,
That's a great book. Sorry,
I,
have we got that on a screen we can bring up? Is that on Amazon?
it's on Amazon. Yeah,
Just give me the title again, and while you're talking, i'll just bring it up and share it.
yeah, our Seventh Day Adventist False Prophets. Um,
You carry on. I'll just look up.
well, sure. Uh, my I had come to the point where I accepted Ellen White as a good woman who simply was perhaps deluded and had uh, gone off from where she should be as far as Bible understanding goes and so forth. It's interesting. Time has gone on. A lot of research has come out. The White estate, it was evidently still hiding things. And now Steve Daly came out with his book, Ellen White, A Psychobiography.
Mm,
And that book just blew my mind. It really changed my thinking about Ellen White. I
mm,
find it difficult to say much positive about the woman after reading this book. She comes across as a devious and grasping person who's taking care of herself more than anybody else.
mm.
And I was very interested in the way that it changed my thinking over time.
Tell us more about the book. Like what got you to the point? Because it was 1990, I think it came out.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Uh, well, after leaving Adventism and Adventist employment, I got a job as the dean of a business school in West Philadelphia. And by the way, I loved the job. I was there 5.5 years. But one day I was talking to a woman who was a Christian, telling her my story. She said, "You've got to write a book." I said, "You know what? I think you're right." So I commuted by train, commuter train, an hour each way, 5 days a week. And so I got yellow writing pads and went to work. And the book, I started that in 1984. The book went on. I went through 6 drafts of it.
Right.
And I kept changing it, trying to make it better and so forth. And eventually, of course, it was picked up by P&R Press in 1990. And I'm very happy with the way the book did. It lasted in publication 31 years. I thought it might last 5 years.
That's incredible.
And it lasted 31 years. So I was very happy about that. And I'll be honest, I had read the book the other day and thought, I wrote a pretty good book.
Yeah. Interesting, because I just had a little mind blank. When I was starting to look in the early 90s, your book is one of the books that influenced me, along with Brinsmead's 1844 Re-examined, Prophetess of Health. Those three books. So you're in the trinity of books that helped me.
Good.
I'll bring it up onto the screen now.
Yeah.
So it's available there on Amazon. Easy to find. I just typed in Seventh Adventist False Prophets and your name, Wallace Slattery, and up it came. So I encourage people to go and get a copy. I think some of them are quite expensive because so it's officially out of print, is it?
That's correct, yes.
Have you thought about doing it on a Kindle version?
I haven't, no. Maybe I'm too old-fashioned.
You could do an audiobook and a Kindle version and get some life going in it again. Yeah.
I'll talk to the grandkids about that. They're better at these things than I am.
So who now, after that 31 years, the publisher goes, look, you can have the rights to sell it independently. Is it, or are they, who has put it on Amazon there?
I don't know. I'd have to check.
Right.
I hadn't thought about it. I was just very happy that it was out there for 31 years. I
incredible.
want to talk about maybe the deviance that Adventism produces.
Yeah.
Carol and I, both of us, were taught that Jesus being Michael the archangel was generally accepted by Christianity. So there was never a question about it.
No.
And literally 6 months after we left Adventism, the people who were so instrumental in getting my book published, Bill and Joan Setnar, visited us. They were cult fighters up in central Pennsylvania. They came down to visit us. And as soon as they sat down, Joan looked at us and said, well, you Adventists believe that Jesus is Michael the archangel. And I stood there all wide-eyed and innocent. Said, why, most Christians believe that. No, they don't. We were stunned. All our lives we'd been taught that it was generally accepted by Christians. That as Adventists, we were taught that. It wasn't until 6 months literally after we left Adventism that we found that that's just not the case at all. I think that says something.
Yeah. Yeah. I even asked a pastor recently about that. I said, do Adventists still believe that? And he said, well, kind of. So it seems to be even prevalent amongst Adventism even to this day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't think there's any question about it. I have discussed it with Adventists, and they're adamant. That's how it is.
Yeah. By the way, who watches, who cares? Gillian Ford, thank you, Gillian, has reminded me it was Doug Hackelman, and I think I don't know what I need. I need to sleep. Sometimes I go to bed late because I get so excited about doing these shows. And Adrian pointed out a little bit earlier the name of Brinsmead's business. I'm just scrolling back to see if I can find it. Yeah, I didn't get to bed again till 4:30 this morning. That's like 3 nights in a row. I just get really excited about doing interviews, and I was really looking forward to today. Have you got your book in front of you there?
Yes, I do.
Can you just look at some of the chapter headings and just see if they trigger some memories that you can unpack? Read the chapter title, and then just see if it just give us a bit of a some insights into what springs back into your mind.
The first chapter is called Cutting the White Ties. And I start off, incidentally, talking about Harriet Tubman. Peter, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She was a famous woman, an escaped slave, who then went back to the South again and again, getting slaves away from their masters up into the north where they could be free.
Right.
I compared that to what I was doing. You might say I was sort of an escaped slave of Adventism, and now I'm coming back to get other people out of it. So, and then I go ahead and talk. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just said I like it.
Okay. And then I go on and talk about my odyssey leaving Adventism. The second chapter is the history and teachings of Seventh-day Adventism. It talks about how Adventism arose. And by the way, I don't know if people are familiar with it, but when the Millerite thing collapsed, when October 22, 1844 came and went, there were people had sold everything. They woke up, and that morning they were absolutely, literally penniless. And it is documented that there was a large influx of people into the mental health facilities of the time. It was a catastrophe for those people. And I would say Adventism has been leading a lot of people down some primrose paths ever since then.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of if you get caught in the potholes of Adventism, I think it can lead to some mental health issues for sure.
Yes. Well, I could say some more about that, but
yeah.
Well, it's just very briefly. Back in the 70s, there was a psychological exam. I forget the name of it. That was administered to Adventist seniors in two academies, Monterey Bay Academy, and also the one next to Berrien Springs. What do they call that college there? Anyway, Berrien Springs Academy. And what they honestly expected was that they'd get these sort of superhuman kids that really had their acts together psychologically. And what they got instead was a bunch of really, really messed up kids. The results were so bad that they suppressed the documentation, the results. Now, you're not supposed to do that with scientific material, but they did.
That's incredible.
And I've talked to two people who were involved in that test, so wow. I know it.
Is it available online now? Do you know?
I doubt it very much. I think I have no idea. I have not heard of anything like that, so I don't know. My next chapter. This is the big chapter in the book. A closer look at Ellen G. White. And I started off talking about whether she was the messenger of God. For example, here's a statement that appeared in the Review and Herald. Seventh-day Adventists hold that Ellen G. White performed the work of a true prophet during the 70 years of her public ministry. As Samuel was a prophet, as Jeremiah was a prophet, as John the Baptist, so we believe that Ellen White, Mrs. White, was a prophet in the Church of Christ today. And then I go through that at length. I write about the mistakes that she wrote, including how she said that floods, at the time of the flood, volcanoes were caused by underground ore bodies exploding and burning. Well, everybody knows better than that today. A third grade student can straighten her out on that. The amalgamation, you're familiar with those stories.
Yeah.
But
I'd like your perspective on it, because there's some slippery little ways out of that the apologists try and suggest. I'd like you to try and seal it up to make it impossible to get out of.
Let's put it like this. The apologists have said that she simply meant that there was promiscuous interbreeding of humans among humans and animals among animals.
Yeah.
Amalgamation means combination. And in fact, F.D. Nichols, in his book, defines them as meaning that mankind and animals interbred promiscuously among their own kind. However, The dictionaries tell us that amalgamation means combination. Consider what happens when we interchange combination for amalgamation in these statements by Ellen White.
Mm.
Since the flood, there has been combination of man and beast, as may be seen in the almost endless varieties of species of animals and in certain races of men. The other one, it was the base crime of combination of man and beast, which defaced the image of God and caused confusion everywhere. Uriah Smith wrote a book defending Ellen White, including those amalgamation statements that they had to do with the lower, so-called lower races of people, some of the more primitive races, interbreeding with animals.
Mm.
Ellen and Jim loved the book. James, her husband, loved the book so much that they bought several thousand copies to peddle at camp meetings and so forth. So obviously, they liked what it said.
That's right, and I think he even names certain tribes and even mentions certain tribes of Native American Indians.
Yes, Digger Indians.
Yeah, that's right, and it's interesting that I'd heard the number 5,000 books that they were selling at camp meetings. So if they weren't agreeing with what he said, they'd hardly endorse the sales of those books.
What was that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
If they didn't agree with what he was saying, you'd think they'd hardly endorse the sale of about 5,000 books
Well, exactly.
of his. And even just think about that for a second. 5,000 books. Like if even today, if you in Australia, if you sell 10,000 books, you'll make it to number one in the Australian kind of charts of book sales. 5,000 books, and you think over the years how many books that Ellen has sold. It makes a lot of money.
Oh
These
yeah,
book sales,
I'm
yeah,
just buying and selling them,
yeah.
and putting them out. Yeah.
Sorry,
I
carry on.
I bring out is that she said that the people back now, this back in the 1880s, that the people should remain celibate. They should not, men and women, the husbands and wives should not be having children. And that you can imagine the problems that caused. They
Yeah,
quietly retired that one. And then, of course, the shut door. And this is the most interesting one, of course, where probation had closed and no more people would be saved. And the interesting thing is that the F.D. Nichols said, or the Adventists have come out and said, well, she meant that those people back then who had rejected the Millerite movement were lost. But stop and think about it. Imagine you were a Christian back then, and you know that Jesus said that nobody knows when Jesus is returning. If you're biblically correct when you say that. As a Christian, I am correct when I say nobody knows when Jesus is coming. It's not going to be October 22, 1844. Now, the Millerites are wrong. And yet, according to the Adventist leadership, the Christians who were biblically correct are doomed to hell, and the Adventists who are biblically wrong are the ones going to go to heaven for this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a problem there.
That's right. And she endorsed the dates of William Miller as
Oh,
being
yeah.
correct.
One thing that Steve Daly does in his book, he points out that they continue to set dates. This was something I wasn't familiar with.
Yeah. They kind of started watering down that. I think they were expecting 1851 was the 7 years after 44. I think that's when she would say that line where she says something like, what we have had years to prepare for, you will only have months.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Is it true that after that second failed attempt at date setting, or I think there was a lot between that time, that that James refused to publish any of Ellen's visions for a few years?
Steve, that has been written. Steve Daly mentions that rather at length. Seems to have been. There were several years where nothing came out in hers. Not only that, But the book Early Writings, which was her first book, was quietly expunged of those statements, the shut door
Yeah.
statement.
I remember interviewing Steve Daly, and he said, I think something like 39 sentences or paragraphs were taken out of the original.
I hadn't heard that much. Wow.
I
Yeah.
might be wrong, but there's fact checkers out there. Hey, a lot of people are posting in the comments where people can go and buy your books, not just on Amazon. There's some other places. I'll just quickly bring one up on the screen. Gillian said that they're available on Abe Books, and you can get them from even around $10. There's 7 used ones there. There's still a couple of new ones available.
Yeah.
There's 9 new ones for $35. So it's fantastic that it's still out there and people are buying it, and I hope you get some royalties from it.
Well, probably not at this point, but that's okay. I didn't write the book to get rich, believe me.
No.
I,
So sorry, back to the book. I'm sorry to sidetrack, but it's so interesting.
anyway, then I also another section is, did she ever contradict the Bible? And I bring a lot of contradictions out, including about Michael. Again, it's interesting that when in Jude 9, it says, even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not dare to bring a slanderous accusation against him, but said, the Lord rebuke you. Now that's interesting, because notice that it says Michael is talking about the Lord in the third person. I'm an old English teacher. Third person is someone else. Michael is not Michael is not the Lord.
Yeah.
The Lord in the Bible, who is the Lord in the New Testament? Jesus. Consistent. So he's basically saying, Jesus rebuke you.
Yeah. I think what we were saying earlier about the more progressive Adventists that stayed. So you were progressive Adventist, evangelical Adventist, gospel Adventist, whatever, and then you left when you realized it wasn't going to change. Ellen
Right.
White, there's all these falsities here. Is that a word? And a lot of the ones that stayed have hoped that Ellen White would be put in perspective. And I think it's key to realize that at many points, and perhaps Glacier View was the last one, I can't think of any between 1980 and now, 44 years later nearly, where there has been a moment where someone can publicly question Ellen White's authority. That was perhaps the last moment where the church could have put her into perspective. But it seems that the movement of elevating her to the prophet equal to the prophets of the Bible is growing and growing and growing.
Yeah. And I don't know. Fortunately today, with the internet and other things and people like you and so forth, there's a lot of people out there saying, hey, wait a minute, let's discuss this. That wasn't happening when I was young.
No, that's right. Can I ask another question just while I've
Sure.
got you? This is something new that came to me the other night. I was chatting to somebody and we were talking about Ellen seemed to love adding to the Bible with a bit of artistic license. And
Yeah.
in some ways, okay, that's okay. She's adding a bit of a paraphrase kind of perspective. For example, she talked about, Satan in heaven and an angel passes by. He says, hey, take me to God. And he asks God to forgive him. And God says, no, mate, it's too late. That's not in the Bible. But it's just added to it for a bit of color. You can kind of go, okay, well, that just gives a bit of artistic license. And there's many other things. She talks about when the New Jerusalem lands and we're about to have 1,000 years of heaven on earth and all the devil and everyone else is burnt forever. She talks about how some who were sinned more than others burnt a little longer, that kind of thing. But when I was having this conversation with this friend, we then looked at the whole great controversy perspective, this battle behind the scenes. That's not even biblical. Like the whole big picture fight and this and that going on behind the scenes, that's not biblical. So the whole foundation of Adventist perspective of the great controversy is just coming from this imagination of Ellen's and copied from others. Am I right?
Well, yes, you are. Let me mention that Dr. Fred Veltman, who was the one who was the church set up to explore Ellen, especially in Great Controversy. That was the book that he
Desire of Ages.
I think, well,
he did 15 chapters of the Desire of Ages for 8 years. The committee studied it.
He did say that about 50% of the Great Controversy was, incidentally, we had him to dinner.
Oh, really?
Brilliant man, very erudite.
Tell us about that.
Well, I met him, and he was coming from, I think, Pacific Union College at that time. And so I invited him to dinner at our house. And of course, you know, as I said, my father-in-law was a high church official, and my mother-in-law was a church employee. And so he was quite delighted to come over. We all got together, had a marvelous time, and I asked him a lot of questions. And he basically, he kind of held judgment, I guess is the best way to describe it. But he did say that he was going. Well, he had another man with him too, and they were going to really research it carefully.
What year was that?
I believe 1981. Not positive about that.
Yeah.
Not then.
Wow. Because I think the research started in 1984 and went for 8 years.
Yeah. Well,
he did talk about other books as well, but I think they just went, wow, there's just so much here. We'll never get it done. So they zeroed in on 15 chapters of Desire of Ages.
Donald McAdams, I have not met him, but he did make the statement, and it's in the Daily Book, that all of the Ellen White books should be footnoted with materials that she's drawn from others, except for early writings, and he's not sure about that.
That might be the only original book. Although I think a couple of her visions in that book are quite similar to Joseph Smith's.
There you go.
Yeah. So
well, she was a contemporary of Joe Smith too, you know.
Say that again.
She was a contemporary of Joe Smith.
That's right. Yeah.
By the way, Joe Smith tried to seduce one of my great aunts.
What? Tell us that story.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. What was their names? I shouldn't have mentioned without thinking of their name. But anyway, what happened was that Joseph Smith, his wife was beginning to age a little, and Joseph Smith was still a good-looking man, and he had a lot of attractive young women around looking at him with worshipful eyes. What to do about it? Well, you can't say that he wasn't resourceful. He started sending these young women's husbands off to England, mostly England, as missionaries. And he would then call the girls in, the young wives, and inform them that God had told them that they were to become his wife while their husband was gone. And it was working quite well for him. I just can't think of my...
if it comes to you, let us know.
But anyway, he called her in, and she basically told him where to go, and it's a really hot spot. Then she called her husband, wrote her husband. He came flying back, and they left Mormonism for a while, caused a big commotion. But anyway, it's in the history books.
Yeah. And didn't one of Ellen White's cousins have something to do with...
I've heard that, yeah.
That as well, yeah.
Yeah. Well, good story.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Back to the book. Tell us some more from some more recollections.
Yeah. Does Christ's blood cancel sin? Here's one. The Bible says, yes, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. Also, Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Ellen White, the blood of Christ was to release the repentant sinner from the condemnation of the law, was not to cancel sin. It will stand in the sanctuary until the final atonement. It just goes on and on.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That one, the about the cancelling of sin, is very different to what the Bible teaches.
Here's one I enjoy. Can we attain a sinless state in this life? The Bible says no. If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we claim we have not sinned, we make him out to be a liar, and his word has no place in our lives. For there is no one who does not sin. Ellen White, everyone who surrenders fully to God is given the privilege of living without sin. Now, I've got to tell you that my last 2 years there in California, we had some people come down from the Weimar Institute to give a series of lectures to the church members. And we had a man stand up there in front of us and twice state that he had not sinned for 2 years.
Except for that moment just then when he was sinning with the sin of conceit.
That's right, yeah. That impelled our church board, our school board chairman, to leave that church. He went to another Adventist church. He'd had enough of that after that. But of all the things to say, I mean,
I know.
audacity.
I know. Hey, before we go back to the book, I just want to bring up something that was literally came across my my plate last night. The Now Church has written, not long after she wrote that, the book we were just talking about, the what's the first early writings. God showed her not to pray for the lost anymore. That came up on someone's feed this morning, and I just wrote on their post, that's just totally unbiblical. Like, there's nowhere does the Bible say it's time to not pray for the lost. It's time to not welcome them into the flock. It's the opposite.
Here's one I think you might enjoy because it is something that is so often said about Ellen White, the spirit of prophecy. You've heard that. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he said, "My wife and I have been reading the Spirit of Prophecy." And incidentally, he said, "Wouldn't you like to read the Spirit of Prophecy?" And they were using patriarchs and prophets.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't say it, but I said, "I have another name for it." He said, "Oh, really? What?" I said, "Well, since you asked, plagiarize and prophet." But anyway, this is about the Spirit of Prophecy. Is Ellen White the Spirit of Prophecy? And even the Adventist Church has been backpedaling rather furiously in what they say about Ellen White. As one scholar rightly remarked about the copying done by Ellen White, at least it shows she was a reader. But the director, this is the one I want to read to you, the director of the ministry of Ellen White in the Northern European Division now admits that what Adventism has been forced to concede. I believe that Ellen White had the gift of prophecy, but she is not the spirit of prophecy. That's a high church official saying that she's not the spirit of prophecy.
Wow. Who said that?
Just a second.
Check the footnotes.
Yeah, I'll give it to you.
While you're finding that, I just want to bring up Angela Lima. Just wrote the worst book for her was Messages to Young People. I almost had a nervous breakdown after reading it, and the compiler of the book committed suicide. That's interesting. I'll get your thoughts on that book in a moment, but let's find out who.
There it is. E.H. Foster, Confidence and Controversy, British British Union Messenger, February 3, 1984, pages 2 and 3.
Wow, that's amazing. Do
Hmm.
you recall and have any insights on Anna Rice Phillips? When Ellen White came to Australia in 1890-91, during the time she was away here, I think Wagner and Jones, or one of the two, I think possibly Prescott and Daniels, became not converts, but they endorsed Anna Rice Phillips as being a true prophet and also having the spirit of prophecy within the church. Of course, when Ellen came back, she put a stop to that, and she wrote to Wagner and said, paraphrasing here, but how dare you promote this person? I know what the spirit of prophecy is, and I can confirm that she doesn't have it. That kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
What have you come across him? I've tried to Google her, and there's very, very little, only tiny amount of information about her. Apparently, she recanted and became a valuable worker in the church for the rest of her life. Go to the apologists.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I haven't. No,
No.
I haven't.
I'd love if those watching, if anyone has any information on her, to let me know. Before we get back to your book, just I'm interested in, there's a bit of a side discussion going on how certain books scared the willies out of some of those who are watching today. And Angela Lima says that messages to young people practically gave her a nervous breakdown, and the compiler of the book committed suicide. Do you know much about that? And
I haven't. No.
what books would you say gave you some nightmares?
Well, certainly messages to young people.
Is that, I don't think that's available anymore, is it? Is that one being taken off the shelf?
Also, I went through a lot of the testimonies, and I found them to be dark and defensive, and they were not what I would have expected. It certainly didn't sound like something from the Bible.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of darkness in there, isn't there? And
Yeah,
even though I had what I would say is a very progressive, happy childhood, especially here at Avondale, um, I would still have nightmares about running to the hills. And whenever we went on Sabbath afternoon walks up into the mountains here, I'd be looking for little caves and where we could run to and hide. And little 7-year-olds shouldn't be faced with that kind of fear.
when Adventists talk about the Sunday closing laws, I
Mm,
ask them, especially somebody my age where we've been around a while, I'll ask them, when was it harder to get a gallon of milk? Back in 1955 or today on Sunday?
mm,
Back in 1955, we had to travel several miles across town
yeah,
because only one store was open.
yeah,
And forget about buying a pair of pants or
yeah,
shirt or something. Those stores were not open.
yeah.
We talk about Sunday closing laws is a joke.
Yeah, the apologists are shifting their perspective on that now and are talking about how a government can control you and shut down your bank account and this kind of thing. But they're stepping away from saying that Catholics are going to bring in the Sunday law. Again, they're very clever. They are very clever at what magicians do. They redirect your attention somewhere, and while they're doing that, they shuffle something else. And then when you're back looking again, they go, "Oh, see,"
I've
and
had
you
experience with that.
you're supposed to go, "Nothing to see here."
Yeah.
Had you read The White Lie? Because it's not The White Lie, The White Truth, but apparently they were preparing. They knew The White Lie was coming out,
I haven't
um,
my
but
Walter.
but The White Truth came out as from the division from the GC, I think, and I found more questions raised when I read The White Truth than answered. There were new things raised. I thought, oh, I didn't know that. But
Yeah.
had you met Walter Ray?
Oh, I knew Walter Ray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
He
sorry. You did say that you went and visited him. He was 30 miles away. That's right.
him
Uh,
twice,
yeah, you
and
met him a few times.
I met with him twice, and then also on I Carol and I went to uh, uh, what do they call it? A spectrum meeting. Yeah, it was these spectrum meetings they used to have
That's right. Yeah.
at Loma Linda, and he spoke, and we went up and talked to him afterwards.
Right.
Yes, and I called him. I asked him for help with my book several times.
Yes. Yeah,
I
interesting.
thought the world of the man.
Did he
Brilliant man.
give you some written comments and advice on the book, or just over the phone?
Written, but advice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, fascinating guy. I think let's see. I think Kevin Morgan is watching today. I've interviewed Kevin, and he is an Adventist apologist, and he suggested that he spoke to Walter Ray, and that Walter said if he realized, and Kevin, if you're watching, tell me if I'm misquoting you, but if he realized, this is Walter Ray, if he realized that there was kind of plagiarism and copying and borrowing in the Bible, he would have seen that in context and not released the white lie. I'm not sure I would agree with that, but Kevin said that that's what he told him.
If I quote from the Bible, I'm simply quoting from God's word. If that's not the saying, or if I write it down, they did not have quotation marks back then. They didn't have punctuation, in fact, and so you did not use quotation marks or give sources. So
And people kind of knew at the time too. There was a lot of passing on the material by I've forgotten the name of it. By verbal passing on, and so there was a lot of recognition. If Luke used this or Mark used that paragraph or whatever, they knew that they were referring to scripture. My understanding is that the way they borrowed and copied from each other was different to what Ellen White was doing.
Oh, I think so, yeah. And not only that, but I mean, I think it was probably, shall we say, an open secret. People knew that from their own Bible study, that the man was quoting from the Bible there.
Yes, that's what I mean, yeah.
The guy wasn't saying, this is something that came directly from God from me. I love to read Paul. I'll just leave it at that. I really find Paul to be a blessing.
Stephen Beagles writes, she admitted using sources in the Great Controversy, but only in the 1911 edition.
She did then,
and not a exhaustive list. I don't think there was any kind of attempt to list Edersheim and all the names.
That's right. Yeah.
Now back to the book. So give us some more gems.
The fourth chapter is molehills into mountains, and I first started talking about it, if the Bible teaches that kind of health reform that the Adventists do. I go on a good deal about that. I talk about wine, alcoholic beverages. I talk about, the so-called unclean meats, all of these things, vegetarianism. Paul is pretty critical of people who talk about abstaining from certain foods and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
All of those out. And then, as I mentioned, also about the wine. I also talk about the problem with jewelry and so forth. It's sad. My mother, she was going around with us 5 kids. I was the oldest of 5. And we would check into motels because my dad's work meant a lot of times we'd travel with him, going places. He was a oil wildcatter looking for oil in various parts of the world, including Canada and so forth. So we did travel. And here my poor mother was checking into motels back then with my dad, with us 5 kids in tow, and no ring. And I know she was important. There was nothing that could be done about it.
Yeah.
My wife, when she was expecting our first child, was attending the University of Nebraska. And here she was going, around without a ring. And she overheard a girl talking to another girl saying, and she's not even married. Oh, this was 1966.
Wow.
And poor Carol came home crying her eyes out. My mother-in-law, God bless her, said, I have an old ring from around here. You wear it. And so from then on, Carol wore a wedding ring. I understand that's no longer an issue. Finally, I think they basically just gave up on it. But you got
Yeah,
Ellen White was saying no ring.
that's right. I remember I was involved with some video production of a concert at Memorial Church, the local. We've got a conservative church and like a traditional Adventist church on the same campus as Avondale University and the college. Well, they used to call it College Church, more liberal, progressive, and we were doing the concert in the more traditional church, and it was a very conservative concert. It was, I think, the Welsh choir and a big orchestra. Anyway, it was going to be televised on Hope Channel and 3ABN, and the producers said that I got the word through the headset. You've got to tell. There's some orchestra members that are wearing wedding rings. You've got to go and tell them to take. This is maybe 10 years ago. You've got to tell them to take their rings off. Now Aussies don't like to be told this kind of thing, and so I just went up the front and I said, look, we've been asked by the producers if you didn't mind removing your wedding rings. And several went like, forget it, I'm not taking my wedding ring off. If I have to do that, I'm getting off the stage. So I said, no worries, carry on. So there's a there was a live broadcast with cello players with the wedding rings, and so it still seems to be an issue, at least 10 years ago anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my chapter on jewelry and so forth. And I basically really contradict it. The next chapter is a short one, The Great Advent Non-Event.
Right.
And it's talking about, 1844, and then was it the sanctuary, going to the sanctuary. The Bible, especially Hebrews, just really flatly contradicts it. Of course, I won't even go into detail here. Desmond Ford and others have done an outstanding job of taking that down.
Yeah. I'd like your thoughts on it though, because people's views are so varied on that one. I'd love just to give us a little bit of a take on it.
I don't think I could contribute very much to it.
Okay.
I think Hebrews 9 really says where Christ once and for all offered atonement. That's not what Ellen White is saying. She's saying Jesus is offering atonement up until the very end. And that's not what the Bible says.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
The next chapter is Adventism, and this is my last chapter, Adventism and the Gospel. And I talk about, the old perfectionism of Adventism versus the completed atonement that Jesus has already done. And I basically offered people the chance to leave Adventism and come into Christianity. I don't offer any particular church. I don't do that.
No.
But I say Christianity. And so I do cover it in several pages. So that's pretty much my book. Let me say something. I think you need your audience needs to understand it. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a researcher per se. What I am is a teacher, a presenter. So what I've done is gone in and taken other people's research, put it together in a simple, understandable way, and then put it in a book. And I wanted the book to be rather short and inexpensive, so that people would find that it was an easy read and they could get the gist of it very quickly and easily, and it wouldn't cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's what I did. My book was going back then, perhaps I shouldn't say, but it was going for, I think it's $5.95.
Yeah.
It was at that time.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted it to be. Like I said, I never wrote this book to become wealthy. I wrote it to present things to people that they could use.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I wonder, I'd love to run past you an idea of me being able to get the rights to do an audiobook of it and, send you the money. But I think it's such an important book. And like you say, it's short, easy to read. It covers all the bases.
Mhm.
Maybe we can chat about that later. I've chatted to a few people about that concept of me doing an audiobook of their work, and so far everyone has said yes. So I'm hoping this year to produce a few audiobooks. Maybe you'd be interested in letting me do that.
Thought of it.
Sorry, you cut out then.
I'm sorry. Fascinating. I never thought of it.
Yeah. So we can maybe chat about that off air, and it might be an option. I've got the mic and the good audio and the recording equipment. We could even get you to read it.
Well, that hopefully I'll have my voice back by then.
So you may have seen questions and comments kind of flying over at the side there. Is there anything that has caught your eye over there?
See.
It's what I love about the conversations in the side. There are people often having conversations with themselves as well as about what we're talking about. Dave Wilmoth, I can't bring it up, but he goes, a great interview. I'm thankful that my grandkids know nothing of Seventh-day Adventists. How have you gone on to raise your family when you left? How old were your kids at the time? And
This is a sad thing. Adventism came out a few years ago stating that 85% of people who leave Adventism, yes, I said that right, become agnostics. And this happened to a large extent in my family. I do have a son who's a baptized Christian. The others have become agnostics. I am a conservative Christian, very active in my church. I like it, and I plan to continue with it. But the others, what can I say? Continue to pray for them, and that's about all I can say at this point.
Yeah, Dale Ratzlaff, may he rest in peace, often would say that as well, that Adventists are kind of wired in such a way that if they leave the church, they become agnostic. And I know my own personal journey was very much one of deconstructing everything back to ground zero.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I'm a babe in the woods still. There's something about leaving the church. You suddenly realize you have very few skills of how to deal in so many ways with the secular world. And you can be easily tricked and deceived and taken for a ride in so many areas. So I've been slowly rebuilding my my beliefs and my life in many ways. I wasn't expecting to have such a loss of identity and struggle. I'm fine now. It's 8 years now, but 8 years this April. But there was 2 or 3 years there that I found unexpectedly very difficult.
I'd like to contrast what I just said about 85% of people leaving Adventism becoming agnostic with what I've seen with my church, Christian church. I've seen people leave, but when they leave, they don't leave Christianity. They go to another Christian church. Real difference, a real contrast.
Stephen Beagles has written No Religion or Churches Without Problems, and I'd agree with that. But my observation is that Adventism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, they're the only ones that come to mind that have a former Adventist branch or former Mormon or former JW. Most other denominations are quite happy for Baptists to interchange with Anglicans, to interchange with Presbyterians. They kind of move around with each other, and they are all aware that churches have problems, but there's an extra intensity with Adventism that is more than just a problem. It creates mental health issues. And one thing I like about what Stephen Beagles does with his own ministry, Gospel Adventism, is that he is trying to create a clear, concise view of what this progressive Adventism is in a kind of a bold public way, So I'm not criticizing what he's doing there at all. But I have noticed that Adventism has a unique set of problems that is more
Yeah.
profound than the other Christian denominations.
Well, that's I feel the same way, exactly. Yeah. Well, let's
Yeah.
see. You got any other questions?
There was a good one here. Fred, how are you going there? Fred Simmons. Ellen also said some will have more gems in their crowns than others, and no one will be jealous. Burned up is burned up. God is not going to toy with some by burning them longer. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Well,
would you? What was the moment? So you left 84 officially,
yeah,
and you took your name off the roll, did the whole. Yeah.
resignation.
What did that feel like? Like I remember when I did it in a different way. I wrote on Facebook, "This is my final Sabbath as a Seventh-day Adventist." That's all I wrote, and then I pressed send. But it took about 4 hours to press it. So there was this moment, and then on the Monday, I wrote to my church and said, "Please take my name off the books." Just kept it simple. Didn't do a big long letter of why or justifying my doing it. I just said, "Hey, personal reasons. I'm leaving. Take my name off the roll." And they wrote back and said, "No worries." And at the next business meeting, 3 months later, it was all done. But it was a significant moment of, wow, I'm leaving. Did you have a similar significant moment?
Yes, I would say so. However, I would say it was a feeling of release, happiness.
Yeah, yeah,
We felt that we had left something that was oppressive and fear, paranoid, and abusive. An abusive relationship, I think we felt.
yes. Boy, that's an interesting thing to say.
Incidentally, the letter back, we got a letter back. We wrote in a letter, and it was a nice letter, but we stated, our beliefs as Christians. The letter we got back was rather nasty.
Yeah,
But whatever. Anyway, we were
yeah.
off.
Off the books. I said in a previous interview recently that Adventists don't have a real great understanding of pastoral care. They do good things, but usually with a little hidden proselytizing agenda, and they definitely don't help in any way those who have left the church. They're more vindictive or, you know.
Yeah.
Can you share with us before we close up the experience you had as a Christian when you looked at the Bible through a new lens and you moved into another community? Tell us a little bit about that and who that community was initially.
One thing that I think you'll find interesting is, I'll tell you, I have nothing to hide. I'm a member of the Church of Christ, and I really like it. They're called restorationists. In other words, trying to bring people, the worship service, back to what it was like at the time of Paul and Peter and so forth. And I was studying with the minister there, the Church of Christ minister there in Spearfish, South Dakota. I was living out there. You saw my pictures where I was a gold prospector.
Yes, yeah.
Clark. But anyway, I was studying with him. And one day I was talking to him, and I'd done a lot of thinking about this. I said, I'm wondering about being rebaptized because, of course, I'd been baptized as an Adventist. But I said, I realized that I was baptized not into Christianity, but into Adventism. When you think about all those rules that you promised to follow, what statements of belief you have to agree with, spirit of prophecy and no alcohol and all those things, it's Adventism. It's not Christianity.
Yeah.
I said, so I've decided maybe I should be rebaptized. He said, why not right now? Well, I got this metal picture of this Spearfish. This is on the north edge of the Black Hills in South Dakota. The temperature was 4 degrees. It was spitting snow with wind. And I got this picture in my mind of going to the local river and chopping a hole in the ice and being baptized. And fortunately, Jerry recognized the look of fear on my face. He said, oh, no. He said, It's inside our church, and it's kept at 96 degrees. I said, oh, okay. So I went home and got a change of clothes and met him out there and got baptized. Very
Wow.
meaningful experience.
Yeah, yeah. And you've found a largely positive, regardless of flaws and faults that every movement and religion has.
Oh,
You've
yes.
found your Christian experience outside of Adventism night and day.
Yes.
Yeah,
I would say so. I'm far happier as a
yeah,
Christian than I ever was as an Adventist.
yeah.
I'm I enjoy reading the Bible. As I said, I love to read Paul and uh, the first, second, third John, etc. And I just it's a good experience anymore. Very different from what it was before.
You
Or it's,
mentioned, sorry, say that again.
it's something you had to do before.
Yeah, yeah. Now it's an expression of love.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, I can't remember the reference or the parallel you gave, but someone who was kind of being a lighthouse or warning people or telling people to come out of something. I can't remember what you were saying, but what if people are watching now that are on the fence, they feel like they're fringe Adventists, they're a bit shocked by a lot of the stuff that they're hearing on social media and on my program and other programs. Um, what would be your to would you, like Des Ford used to not really at all try and bring people out of Adventism. He would encourage them to stay and make it work within the church. Whereas I'm getting the feeling that you'd be saying, "Hey guys, come out of there. Over here, it's much warmer. You'll be blessed in a different way." What's something you can say that would entice people to make a decision?
Let me read my last two paragraphs of my book. Adventism teaches the Trinity, at least after 1890. That's not a very good Trinity because it has Michael, remember. The all-sufficiency of the atonement in Christ in its own way, and the power of the golden rule is to be commended for that. Adventism also burdens its followers with needless restrictions and rules, just as the ancient Hebrew Christians sought to burden the Galatians. Paul's divinely inspired denunciation of those Hebrews applies equally to Adventists today. Although Adventism shouts, "Come out of Babylon," to members of other churches, Adventism itself is utterly confused as to what constitutes the basis of the Christian message, the gospel. That's what this last chapter is about. Thus, Adventism is part of Babylon. Do you need such a set of needless rules laid on you by often cynical church leaders? Of course not. Come out of her. Come into the sunshine of the pure gospel and experience new life given freely in Christ. That's testimony.
That's the testimony and the call. Yeah. I've really had a great conversation with you today, Wallace. I hope you've enjoyed it too. Really, really enjoyed it. If anyone, as I just wrap up and do a little bit of plug for this or that, if anyone would like to specifically ask Wallace a question, do so now, and I'll bring it up in a moment. Faye Simpson has written, after coming back to the church years ago, you took a service at Ballon. I think you're meaning me, a surfer, long-haired dude. Yeah, that might be me. We
Not
thought
me.
not you. We thought how refreshing, and a few purposely went to hear you, like my family. Must be about 7 years ago. Faye, you're meaning me. I do remember singing at Ballina, I think with Rick Foray maybe. And I have no regrets for the music I did within the Adventist church. I very much enjoyed it. I found that I could sing contemporary music for the younger people, worship music, get a bit of rock music in there occasionally under the radar. We did lots of bush dances. I still do bush dances, bush barn nights, they call them, for Adventist churches. And yeah, I have no regrets about that and that connection. It was all very sincere. And even if I do music for Adventists today, it comes from a place of authenticity and sincerity. I love music. And one thing I will say that I felt over the years, as much as I felt appreciated from the grassroots with the music, I did feel from the administration that I was very much steered into a certain category, and it was never appreciated behind the scenes. After most gigs I did, most over 30 years, 40 years, I would be bombarded with messages, letters, phone calls saying that I was a tool of Satan or a snake or whatever. So that was difficult, but I enjoyed the grassroots connection. Sorry to go on a bit of a tangent there, Wallace, but
I,
let's just see if there's others that have come up. Really appreciate everyone's comments. There's so many. Wallace, you're in our Facebook group, so you might like to go and engage with some of these later. I'm sure people would really appreciate that. Angela Lima has written, "Don't forget Hiding in Plain Sight" by Thunder. Yes, the great read. And yeah, and you mentioned, of course, Steve Daly's books as well. Have you read his new one?
Peter, someone asked me, I wrote a question over here asking if I ever felt that I'd made a mistake in leaving Adventism. And my answer is absolutely not. When I read the Bible, and I read it a lot anymore, I see that the path I'm following, and I'm not saying I'm right, I'm righteous, because I'm not, except through Jesus. But what I'm doing is what was laid out in the Bible. So I don't have a problem with what I'm doing.
Mm. Yeah, good to hear. I have no regrets as well. And I'm sure if people are in the Facebook group and want to reach out to Wallace and say, hey, look, I'm leaving, I've got some concerns, I'm pretty sure you'd be happy to reply to them.
Yeah.
Let's see. We'll wrap it up in a moment, but we're just seeing when I was baptized, there was no mention of the fundamental beliefs or if I believed in them. To my mind, I was publicly professing my belief in Jesus and in following him. You must have signed and thanks for that, Tessie, but you must have signed, I think we had to sign a baptismal vow. And
Yeah.
when I was 11 when I was baptized, and I did kind of, the pastor took me through it, and I just was, yeah, I just want to see Jesus, I just want to be saved. And I was wanting to be ready. I expected the return to be literally within a year, within 6 months. So I don't think I read it too closely. But when I read it years later, I thought, wow, boy, did I sign up for some pretty heavy stuff there. And I'd be interested in your comments. Thank you, Maureen, for this one. I apologize to both my sons for having brought them into the Adventist Church cult. Thankfully, they are not active members. However, the Ellen G. White satanic spirit was part of their upbringing. Wallace, would you go so far as to say that Adventism is a cult and that Ellen G. White had a satanic spirit?
I would, yes. Actually, I have written an article here. I'll pull it up here so you can see the title. I think that shows up.
Oh, it's in reverse, that one. You'll have to read it to us. It's
okay.
mirror. Yeah.
Is Seventh-day Adventism a cult? And I go through 4 basic beliefs of Christianity. A belief that Jesus Christ was unique, God among men, came as the second Adam with no propensity to sin. A belief in the Holy Trinity, a belief that the Bible is the only ultimate source of doctrinal instruction, the final word of authority regarding principles of doctrine and belief, a belief that acceptance of what Jesus did for us in his atonement is the only source of salvation, justification through faith. Then I go show where all the way through where Adventism it fails in all of these. And by the way, one that's very interesting about Jesus being coming to earth without propensity to sin. The Adventists had been teaching, that Jesus came to the earth with the same propensity to sin that we all have. And Walter Martin was about to call Adventism a cult back there in the 1950s because of that. And so some of their theologians got hold of him. I go into detail here, but this is interesting. George F. Knight, in the latest book, Questions on Doctrine, the one that's come out recently,
Right.
He makes this statement: the authors at times push the facts a bit too far on such issues as Adventism's historic understanding of the Trinity,
Yeah.
and they present their data in a way that creates a false impression of the human nature of Christ. Isn't that interesting? In other words, they lied.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was amazed to hear that George Knight said that.
Well, you knew about it.
No, well, I interviewed him, and I've read several of his books, and he's come across as quite the clever apologist, always giving a few gems of context and this. But I hadn't read that, but I had heard that he was a bit more open about saying that they were misleading with their involvement with Walter Martin.
But that tells you a lot. When the leadership is willing, and they've been all along deceptive. Look at the white estates that come out there.
And look at Walter Martin with his interview on the John Ankerberg show with William G. Johnson. He's starting to have some serious doubts there about what he did and how in many ways, like when QOD came out, the Adventists had 1 million members worldwide, but by the interview in 84, they had over 4 million members. And I think that's largely due to his work at making the general public and the church body at large see Adventism as just an evangelical church, which they clearly aren't or weren't.
They're not. That's right. Yeah.
And the backlash was because a lot of the traditional Adventists would go, "Whoa, that's not what we believe."
I know. Yeah.
And who was it that called that group the minority, the lunatic fringe? Who was that? Was that Nichols?
I don't remember.
I can't remember either. But yeah, to me, it's like, no, that was the majority of Adventists. Why do you think? Like, I know that they didn't want to be seen as a cult, and they didn't want to go in the book The Cult, but a lot of them were genuinely trying to bring about a progressive, more updated version of Adventism. These guys on Frida, the committee that helped Walter Martin and that put out the book Questions on Doctrine. So some of their motives were, their intentions were good. What have you thought about that much?
Yes, I have. However, it seems again that the church closed ranks and basically said, well, you can believe what you want to, but at the same time, we're not changing.
Yeah. And when was Questions on Doctrine taken off the shelves? It was no longer made available. Was that in the
60s?
Yeah, so it wasn't out for that long even.
Yeah, and then it was in the early 2000s that they came out with the new version of it, or the new printing of it, I should say.
Yeah, and I haven't explored this at all, were there major changes in that?
I don't know. I'm not aware of that. I did try to get a hold of a copy. I called the Adventist book houses, and they didn't even carry it, at least where I called.
Never did.
Yeah,
I think they'd be purposely trying to minimize, in the current climate, people getting to read it. Stephen Beagles has asked you a question. Wallace, do you believe in eternal hell?
I think that's what the Bible teaches.
And GD, sorry, say that again. You cut out.
There's believing otherwise, but I don't see how you can disagree with it, actually.
GD has said, enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Peter and Wallace. Maureen has said, E.G. White, as well as the other cults, the first based on Freemasonry. What are your thoughts on that? Have you ever come across any evidence that Ellen White or James were involved with Freemasonry?
Yes, I think it's in Daly's book that, for example, they have a Masonic obelisk over their grave.
And, say that again. Oh, yes, yeah.
That there were other things that seemed to have Masonic roots in them. Also, I think he mentions this just came off the top of my head, but it seems like he mentions that some of the early Adventist leaders were Masons.
Right. Because I know Joseph Smith definitely was.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Jim Baker has just written, back in 1973, our academy choir was disinvited to ever return to the main church in the conference for singing heritage singers type songs. Oh, dear. Okay, well, look, I think... and Tessie has replied to my question earlier. She signed nothing. That's very interesting, because I thought you had to sign to be a member.
I thought so
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, maybe before you went into the font, the pastor said, "Hey, Tessie, can I have your autograph?"
Peter, let me say one thing that I've noticed in the last 40 years or 30 years, and that is that previous to that time, becoming an Adventist was a long, drawn-out process. You had to do a lot of study and so forth. Anymore, it seems like they're whipping these people through in 5 days, baptizing them, then figure that they'll pick up on the doctrines in the time in the future. And so it's very different. So I'm not too surprised that some of these people signed nothing.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that could quite possibly be the case. And we'll finish with this one. Cindy Lou, how are you? Has written, I have a first edition Questions on Doctrine, 1957. Wow, I'd love to see that. Should take a photo and share it next program. I read enough to see there were only 22 fundamental beliefs. I should do a compare and contrast for grins and giggles. You do that. That'd be great. And she also says that she did sign in 1969. We had the preacher come over to preach. Jesus Duran, do you like Duran? Is that where you get your name from? You not have to sign anything. That's interesting. Okay, well, we're just about to say farewell. Just a quick plug. It looks like tomorrow I'm going to be booking flights to come to the former Adventist conference. By the way, those watching and who are going, is it the former Adventist fellowship that runs it? Or is it a total separate thing? I need to learn more about that. But yesterday I got about $150 donation towards that. I really appreciate that. That's Aussie dollars, so that's about $5, Wallace, in US.
Oh,
So if anyone would like to help me with, so we've had the people that have asked me to come along have been very supportive in covering the airfare, which is fantastic. Thank you very much. As soon as I confirm later today, and I'll need to cover maybe a hotel, bit of fuel, long-term parking, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to raise another $500 to cover all those expenses. So $150 there, and if you scan that QR code, you can sure help me. That would be fantastic. Also, you can simply go to my PayPal, which is paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music, and that would really help. And if you just put on the donation Pete's USA trip, something like that, then I'll put all those monies towards that. And really appreciate that. So just remove that. So, Wallace, I'd love to have you back on the show again sometime, and I'm going to get out my copy of your book. I'll bring it up again on the screen. Highly recommend people go and get this book, Are Seventh-day Adventists False Prophets, by my guest, Wallace Slattery. And the book is still available, brand new or secondhand. And I'm going to read my copy again, and I'd love to have you back on in a couple of months and drill down a bit deeper into the book as well. So thank you for your time today, Wallace, and everyone that's on watching. Send up those likes and love hearts in appreciation for our very special guest today. Thank you, Wallace. Until next time, we'll bid you farewell and go and have a good sleep. Thank you very much.
okay. Take care.